Hello, welcome to my video. This is Greg with the Crashing Stars. I wanted to make a video on just my process for writing and everything like this. I think I'm going to make it a multi-part series. And this video is going to kind of focus on, inspiration and how I start my songs. Because ultimately you got to start from somewhere. Obviously, lots of people have different ways of coming up with music. Some people like to start with the lyrics. Some people, like to start with the instrumentation, add the lyrics later. Some people can just write everything at once in their head, have an idea of what they want. But yeah, my process is, I like to start with the music first, sit down at the piano. The piano is definitely my instrument of choice, was classically trained since I was a little kid. And I start, just jamming and coming up with ideas and ultimately trying to see what works. And a lot of the times I'll sit here and play different things. I'll come and just play around, and then I might come up with an idea and say, oh, that's really cool, I like that. And most of the time it obviously doesn't work that way. I'll have to play around, make a lot of mistakes. But if I find something I like, I'll eventually get out my phone and you do a voice memo or record it somehow. Because if I don't, then I'll forget it, and I'll have like a really cool idea, and then I'll forget it. So ultimately that's how I remember. And then I might come up here. I have a upright piano downstairs that I play a lot on. I prefer it just to kind of come up with ideas. And I'll come up here and I have this little Yamaha that's connected to my computer. I have Logic on here. And then, once I come up with the idea, I'll come in here, obviously pick the, beats per minute. And then I have, some tools in here that I use. I use Keyscape as kind of my little MIDI emulator here for piano, which I think works really well. It sounds beautiful. You can kind of control all the different features in here, as like sustain and notes and how everything. So anyway, come in here. You have the EQ. You can play with your tweak, your settings, your color shift, every sorts of things, which is really cool. Note velocity, which is really cool. So anyway, I'll come in here and just start playing and come up with lots of different ideas. So for example, with the Shadow Realm, just playing around and playing the C is like, oh, that sounds good. Or play at the beginning. Like, oh, I'll mess up, eventually come up with something like, oh, that sounds good. I'll play it and I'll say, what, that will be the the intro, the verse, and and also come up with different things. I'll be like, oh, I like that as the chorus, and I might hum something. And might come up with some ideas, what could sound good on top of it. And then come and put my ideas down here. And I'll come up with different things, like for the sheriff, just a simple and it's like, oh, that sounds good. I gave my oath on sacred lands, a badge, Bible steady hand. And then like, oh, that's cool, write it down and eventually come up with something. And that's kind of where the inspiration starts. And a lot of the stuff is just kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, I was writing Bonfire of the Heart, come up with that inspiration, and eventually you come up with a song, and sometimes, you could come up with different ways of, coming up with, like Run, Brother, Run. You can come up with, in a certain key, you're like, I like that. Maybe I'll try a different, key and play it in a different key, and the cool part about, using, something like Logic is like, you can just transpose it and then, listen to it in a bunch of different keys and be like, hey, I like it. Sounds best in that key. And I've done that with a lot of songs, and, and sometimes I'll just come and just start, playing like a bass line, and, for like, Straight to Hell, I came in and I was just doing this. It's like, what could sound good for that? And I started playing around. So I kept playing around. And then I'm like, oh, that sounds good. And then you keep practicing. And you get better. And you're like, what could I add after that? And I really like that bass line. So we keep going. So, that's how it, organically starts. And, I'm curious how other artists in here, come up with their music, whether they just write lyrics first and then, put a song and melody to lyrics, or if they, end up, going a different direction. But, this is my process for kind of coming up with ideas, and, obviously what developed everything that you hear, in the album. And, I think on the next video, what I can do is take you through then, once I come up with the idea, how it then translate into Logic. So obviously, the recording part, the coming up with then vocals, because that is like the next step. Once I kind of get the main melody down, the next part is to come up with vocals and melodic vocal pattern on kind of how I want to follow there. So and then obviously adding the additional instruments. I have my guitar that I play, hook up. Obviously use virtual instruments on a lot of the stuff. So if you hear, on some of my songs, like you hear a violin or cello or banjo, I use on a lot. Like I'm using virtual instruments. I play everything through the keyboard, and then I use a virtual instrument, a MIDI to transfer it. And that takes a lot of work, because then you got to program. Obviously it doesn't sound good to start. You have to program everything and EQ everything and compress everything to get it to sound realistic. But yeah, and then eventually everything kind of comes together, and then you got your demo, and you're like, that's what I like. And then once you got your demo, you then go through and get it all fixed up and start mixing it, and replace any sections that you feel like need to be improved, and eventually get it mastered and record the vocals and all that fun stuff. So yeah, I'll take you through kind of that process on the next video. But thanks for tuning in, and appreciate everyone's time. Have a good one.